Thank you, Mark. I'm really glad to be here. Hey, everybody. Welcome to B-Sides Greenville 2021. Super happy to be presenting to you today. Can everyone see this slide that I'm sharing and presenting, sharing my screen out? Can I get a thumbs up or a hey in the chat?
Yes, we can see it.
Thanks, Hillary.
Good to see you.
You as well. I'm glad you're here. It's exciting to be here for B-Sides Greenville, even if it's virtual. Gathering together with the InfoSec community is always so much fun. Today, we're going to be talking about, in this session, specifically about report writing in the context of doing penetration tests or even training engagements that we might do, including like certification exams. So the title of my presentation is Streamlining the Report Writing Process with AutoRpt. And AutoRpt is a tool that I wrote to fill in some of the gaps that I've experienced, both within my own workflow when it comes to doing security reviews and assessments, and also some of the confusing information that I've gathered over time. I don't know if it's going to speak to your use case as well, but I'm thinking that it's going to, so I'd like to present that to you today. Real quick, who I am. For those of you who haven't attended an official B-Sides in person, enjoy this nice slide of what happened in 2019. Get a feel for that community aspect. I think we're all missing that community aspect of information security at these conferences, and it's been a pretty amazing run for the last few months. I mean, August, we had DEF CON 29, and then recently B-Sides Charlotte, Augusta, and then you got the capstone of B-Sides Greenville. So it's always good to have our local community here. My name is Ben Acord, but I go by Overcast on the DEF CON Discords, and typically anything inside of the DEF CON umbrella for the DEF CON group, I go by Overcast. So I answer to both. It's not the name my parents gave me, but I make them call me that anyway. I work at Floor, primarily with Mark Funderburk. We work in mission solutions where we deliver successful solutions to our government clients. But I'm also one of the co-founders of the local DEF CON 864 group here in the upstate, which is just a collection of anybody who wants to come and share in that amazing ability to communicate what I'm learning and then learn from each other. So that's one of my passions, is to actually be able to give back to those who are in that same community. And recently, I've also started teaching at Greenville Technical College. I noticed some of my students have shown up or former students have shown up in the session. So it's good to see you guys there. And I teach the penetration testing 1 class over at Greenville Tech. And that's the main focus for this talk, is around penetration testing. In fact, the actual code for AutoRpt came from a personal failure of my own. In May, I sat for the Offensive Security Certified Professional exam. And the next morning, as I sat with a coffee cup in hand and a notepad and doing my lessons learned, I realized that there were some pretty big gaps in my workflow, and some things that had cost me a lot of time. And actually, I'm not blaming the tools. I am blaming my own workflow. But I realized that those gaps led to the smoldering ruin that was the failure email that came into my inbox that day. So what I'd like to do is walk through how I realized that those gaps exist. So let's take a look briefly, at what the penetration testing methodology is. It's this layered approach, and we love layers or diagrams or triangles or Venn diagrams to explain things in information security. I mean, we can't talk about confidentiality, integrity, or availability without some kind of a triangle diagram of sorts. But in this case, we're looking here at the very bottom layer. We're doing that planning and scoping of the engagement, getting the rules of the road, so to speak. And then we're moving into that open source intelligence and information gathering phase, collecting vulnerabilities and doing that active reconnaissance, attacking and exploitation. And then at the very top, I'm combining 2 tiers into one here. We have reporting. Reporting is the last thing that's done, but out of everything in this cake, this layered approach, it's the most important. If a company engages us to do a penetration test or a security review, they don't want us just to go and do it. They actually want to be able to receive results that they can tangibly hold and act upon. And that's where the report comes in. Unfortunately, during this process, it's not chutes and ladders or a board game where you're only ever in a single state at any given time. You're often required to multi-thread task and action where you're doing some work on a vulnerability while thinking forward into either a chained exploit process to gain the shell or whatever else you're looking at there. So if I could take this image and maybe just swirl the cake a little bit, that's typically what it may look like during the process. Whereas reporting at the very end is you're taking all the results you've collected, all those notes you've accumulated over that penetration test, and you're boiling them into an official report, a slide deck, something that the customer can hold and act on. But when it comes to guidance for how we write that report, it's kind of a hot mess. We have some official bodies who have released some guidance on this topic, and depending upon the industry vertical you're in, for example, if you're in fintech, PCI is your go-to. If you're in the government space like I am, NIST is the body that you look to almost every day. And so when it comes to, for example, NIST Special Publication 800-115, their reporting section in that document is literally 2 paragraphs long, and most of that is bullet points. I can summarize it for you very simply. You should write a report, it should contain results, and you need to provide it to someone who asked for it. That's the bulk of what 800-115 says about reporting. And then there's other optional bodies that have produced some pretty helpful information on report writing. A few of them have gone so far, for example, like the Penetration Testing Execution Standard have given headings and subheadings and content descriptions for what should be contained in that report that will aid you in the report writing process. And as you can see from the vulnerability assessment.co.uk, which just flows off the tongue, they've done the same thing where they're blocking out what that report template should look like. But as someone who's either new to the industry or working for a company that now wants to start doing security assessments or penetration tests, which one of these do I pick? Do I have to review all of them and merge them into something that I can act on? I mean, that's an open question here. So we look to further guidance out into the industry, and we do have some amazing blog posts or companies who are tried and true pen test companies. They're doing this every single day. And so we can glean a lot of wisdom from what they've put together and offered online, but we're hoping that they've, included some of the secret sauce to make it all come together and help us in that report writing effort. In the example of like a testing body like Offensive Security, they've given us a template to use for the report writing. And you can see that in the top right there from Megacorp One. But there's a really interesting statement when you review the penetration testing or the Pen 200 course. It used to be called the PWK. Now it's Pen 200. In that section, that first paragraph, it says that every penetration tester will have their own style and preference of workflow and documentation. And that's pretty much the standard approach you hear across the industry. Is it's personal, it's up to you. You can take notes, you can document any way you want to, just, do it well enough so that you can produce a report at the end. And if we look to a broader scope and say, today, if I want to find something quickly and know how to do something, I'm going to look on YouTube and see somebody show me how it's done. And we have some amazing, thought leaders now that are putting out onto YouTube examples of how they conduct their workflow, how they document it. If you've ever watched an IPSec video, he's monologuing. It's almost like a stream of consciousness for his entire workflow through an engagement. It's very impressive. John Hammond's been really upfront with how he takes notes and resources. The Cyber Mentor, and in fact, TCM Security in their course for the PNPT exam is one of the first cases, along with INE, where there's a dedicated training module for how to take notes during the exam, and where note-taking and report writing aren't left just at the very end. Because if you wait to the end, it's too late. You may have forgotten something and you may not have access back into the company to do it. So if we take all of those options and we gather them together, we're left with, IPSec's tool set. We're left with John Hammond's tool set. Trusted Set gave some examples. Well, if I've gathered all of that guidance together, all that wisdom, and I keep testing and trying it out, which is the case that I've got here, I've got a file system that's littered with examples where I've tried one person's way of doing documentation and report writing. And then I move on to try someone else's because I'm trying to find efficiencies. I'm trying to find something that's really going to help me get through, that finish line well. So I've got this huge collection of tools. I've got a bunch of I've got a huge collection of scattered documentation around on my file system. And even within Kali Linux, we have tools that are included, but you either quickly hit a paywall or you have limited functionality. So what I wound up doing when I sat for the Offensive Security Certified Professional exam is, if the penetration testing methodology was a layered cake, all of my little tips and tricks that I'd gathered for note taking were kind of like a bunch of little candies jammed into this cake baking process, and really didn't fit what I was trying to accomplish. If I'm trying to make a cake, and honestly, this analogy is breaking down really quickly. I don't know how far I can run with it. And this is an image heavy slide deck. Apologies in advance, halfway through. But what I really needed my notes to be is that icing. The icing of the report around the overall cake really comes from the locking in of the icing in between the layers. As each layer is formed and established with the one above it, my notes solidify that bridge between the two. And ultimately, I'm able to produce a solid report at the end because I have a consistent flow between them. I don't have like a gummy bear and a Skittle and other brands between them. So what if I built upon what works? And this is what I had a notepad with me while I was drinking my coffee in the smoldering embers of my OSCP, and I was making notes about lessons learned. What could I improve on? And I thought, I really love AutoRecon. It's a great tool to do that initial overview of a large list of systems if you have their IP addresses, and it has a directory structure. Okay, I can work with that, right? You know, that's a good starting point. And then at the very end, I came across a product by someone named Noraj on GitHub, and they take notes in Markdown with predefined templates. And then you run this Ruby script and it produces the PDF output of your report. That was really helpful for the OSCP exam because you have to submit a PDF included in a 7-zip archive. Okay, so I've got something during my engagement and I've got something at the end of my engagement, but you'll notice there's white space before, between, and after that process. And so I started writing and documenting what would go around those two. What would go around that? How could I enhance that options yet build upon what they have? And that's what led to AutoRpt. And that is a really bold orange. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop this presentation and slide deck, and we're going to go straight to a live demo, because if there's one thing I love to do at BSides, I did it in 2019, is running live code. All right, so there's two tools that I've added in here, and only two tools. The first is Obsidian. It's a markdown editor that lets you switch between the edit view and the actual display view of Markdown, you know, that rich HTML-like view and display. And then the other piece is I have incorporated Noraj's offensive security Markdown templates. Those are all built into this tool. So let's see here. I'm going to go over, and there are 5 use cases that we're going to walk through in this example. And the first one is going to be training. AutoRpt, and first let me show you an example of why I'm going to be using a shortcut. AutoRpt on my system right now is a symbolic link over to AutoRpt, which is where I've done the GitHub clone to a local instance. So now whenever I run AutoRpt, just know it's really calling that Python script in opt. AutoRpt has a wonderful classic menu system. You don't have to use it for everything, but it's here to guide you along the way if you'd like to. So I'm going to use startup. I'm selecting a training effort because today I woke up and I decided I wanted to do a little bit of training to get ready for my next exam attempt. And in this case, we're going to do a Vuln Hub machine. We're going to do Metasploitable 2. And I do know the IP address. And the output for this is only going to be for my own efforts. In fact, my instructor wants me to submit it through the Greenville Tech system. So I'm going to submit it as a document file, a LibreOffice document, or a not so LibreOffice document. And behind the scenes, what AutoRpt does is it creates a directory structure for us in a consistent fashion, and it preloads a bunch of templates for us that we can then go and use. Now, you notice I'm not sitting in any real directory to use that right now, but I can navigate into that directory and take a look at the files that are there. But I can also take a look in my Obsidian and notice that it's already loaded everything that's on the file system, because these are just markdown files. I already have a targets file that I can use. And my next step here is, and I'm going to introduce you to another feature called the situation report, where I'm just going to say, what are my thoughts? And the situation report is a log of your thought processes as you're moving through a pen test. And what's happening behind the scenes is AutoRpt is timestamping that into a file that you can then review at a later time. So you'll notice that it logs both its activities as well as your own. And the value for this is, if I get down a rabbit trail and I realize I may be on a rabbit trail, maybe I can't really exploit that MySQL database. Well, I want to look back and say, what was I doing 45 minutes ago before I got on this rabbit trail? I just look at the situation report. And if I've been good about putting in my entries, I'll know immediately where I got sidetracked. I can also look at the situation report on the command line, because if I don't have to leave the keyboard, or if I don't have to leave the terminal, then I'm being more efficient. So I'm able to update my note taking through sitrep while actively maintaining my engagement against the target. So at this point now, obviously, we would run AutoRecon -t and the targets.markdown file. That will take 16 minutes to run against this target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to preload what I have already done before. I've already run AutoRecon before, and I've loaded these results here. Pretty common. We're all used to AutoRecon and the directory structure that it loads. It has its own report directory, but we're not going to use that because we have our own report directory structure up here. Now, as I'm going through my engagement, I have a template already defined for me in Markdown that has some LaTeX header information. If you don't know what LaTeX is, don't worry. That's just a way of helping to convert to other file formats. And it's pre-stubbed with information about, basically, it's an easy way to can your write-up for your blog post, your LinkedIn post, however you want to put this out after the fact. Remember, we never just want to retain information that we're learning and training on. We want to be able to give that back to others. Part of the reason why I'm speaking now. You'll notice that there are boilerplate variables included in the document. When you go to create the final report, which is automated, AutoRpt replaces these out with specific variables for your engagement. So I'm going to come down here. Now let's take a look at what we've got. The next step that I want to do, I'm going to take a look at the ports. So AutoRpt has a feature that will actually look for common Nmap output file names and show you the results for each target that it finds. What it does behind the scenes, and I need to open the folder here, is it creates an Excel file. One of the things that one of the penetration testers in DEF CON 864 recommended when I was explaining what tool I was building, he said, I like providing my clients with an Excel document of all the port services and versions for every IP address. And so you have here a worksheet tab for each IP, as well as an all ports tab that lists every host and all the ports that were collected there. And that's separate. Now, because we know Metasploitable 2, we also know that we have a bind shell that's already existing for us. So we're going to test this vulnerability to see if we can confirm it. And sure enough, we do get a root shell. I'm going to use FlameShot, which is a tool that I highly recommend for screenshotting. And I am going to take a screenshot to save as evidence. Documents, AutoRpt, training, vulnhub, Metasploitable 2, report images. And we're going to call this 1524. And that's all I'm going to call it. And now I can come over into the report and say this is a critical vulnerability. And I can start writing my documentation for this right here. And we're going to use the standard markdown formatting for putting in our images. For PNG, and depending upon the type of format that you write in, you can even do some CSS to increase the size of the image. I'm just going to leave it as it is for right now. So there's the image, and we don't have to remember to click save or anything like that. It's automatically being done for us. But because I've now validated a vulnerability and I've logged its evidence, both saved it to disk and written it into my report, now I want to go back and actually log that vulnerability with AutoRpt. And if I do listing, there's 0 vulnerabilities currently listed. So I'm going to add one, pick my target. The port number is 1524. And for this one, it's going to just be buy and shell. The business impact, here I can put a likelihood, let's say 90%. I could even, if it reveals company sensitive data, I can list that here as the indicator there. Remediation, pick up where I left off. After collecting the metadata about the vulnerability, we're prompted to add a CVSS level 3 score. And if you know it right here, like the number, I'm just going to say 9. I can just enter it here and it collects it for me. If I said no to do, if I know the CVSS score, it will walk me through every prompt to calculate and build that string for the vector. And that's logged with your vulnerability as well. And then it moves on to prompting us for the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We're going to pick the tactic, and then we're going to pick the technique. In this case, I'm simply saying it's in initial access of a exploit of a publicly facing application. It prompts me to confirm that my values that I entered. And when I say yes, we now have a listing of a vulnerability. Again, that's written out on disk as its own spreadsheet. And that's going to get merged later on into your final report. So let's pretend we finished this full engagement. We are done. We are ready to move on to the next thing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run AutoRpt finalize. And that's it. Your report is done. Now, if I had completed everything in my markdown file here, obviously this report would be much more thorough and complete. But as you can see, there's now a docx file for a not so LibreOffice file format, and it's created the document for us. For whatever reason, I haven't figured this out yet, it doesn't automatically update the table of contents. And you can see as we scroll through, some of the tables get messed up here a little bit, but it has the screenshot and the information that we had keyed in for this vulnerability and exploit. All right, so that's the first example, is training. Now, what if we decide we're going to move on, we're going to do some more training, but this time we're going to go for something big. We've gotten a training budget. We're going to go for an offensive security Pen 200 course. We're going to sign up for it and start the lab. They require a PDF and a 7-zip, so I'm picking that. And you'll notice the directory structure is the exact same. I don't have to worry about, wait, did I log all my documentation and documents, or was I working out of a different file system to use this? It's consistent. It's consistently always in your home directory, documents, AutoRpt, and the markdown files are, if you leave Obsidian open, it automatically recognizes that you've put new files on the file system ready to go. And I can just jump right in and start working either on machines, or here we have the exam report. This is the exact template that Offensive Security released in a ODT and docx format that we used to work in, but now it's markdown thanks to Noraj. I've just broken these out into individual machine names that you need to record for logging. One other item that I want to point out here is there's also a scratch pad markdown. This is where you can just throw random notes and collection pieces along the way without mucking up the markdown for a specific machine. And again, the sitrep report, only applies to the engagement that we're doing at hand. And if I get confused, and let's say, for example, I'm over in doing something else and I decide, you know what, I want to start back on my Pen 200 class again. What was, or what even was the last engagement I was working on? I just run AutoRpt active. It queries what it knows about all of our engagements. There could be thousands of them. And it's going to say, this is the last one you were working on. And here's the directory you were working out of. So I'm going to CD back over into that. And the targets file for this is empty. There's some training where you're going to have to update that manually. And it's true of your exam. It's true of an actual pen test. Because we're not going to be able to preload that for you from a programmatic standpoint easily. We go into report, and you'll notice report just contains basically markdown files at this point. For the sake of time and argument, let's say we completed Pen 200. We've successfully pwned every system in the lab, all the domains, and our report is complete, and we're ready to finalize that. We just run one command. The PDF is created for us by merging all of those markdown files with a number. And then the 7-zip archive is created. And on the file system, if I go back to my training, I now have an offensive security folder, and I can look into that reports directory. Here's the 7-zip archive with the PDF included. And here's the actual PDF. I'm going to scroll out a little bit. Now you notice I forgot to put my offensive security student ID. I am working on a bug to fix that. It prompts for it for the exam, but it doesn't do it for the training yet. We also have a breakdown on the side for the PDF, as well as in the document itself. So if you want to jump to a specific section, you just click the link and it'll take you right there. It's already pre-built just by running AutoRpt finalize. You don't have to do anything special within your markdown. All right, that's training. The second use case that we have is actually taking an exam. I mean, after all, one of the capstones that we want to do is we want to show that we actually have performed some training and gained some knowledge. And one of the ways we do that is we can write stuff out on the interwebs. We can post videos about them, but ideally we're going to want to get a security certification. So I'm just going to run AutoRpt startup. It's hard to talk and type at the same time. And this time, instead of picking training, I'm going to pick exam. And there's a pre-canned list of exams included within AutoRpt where it knows the report structure, it knows the layout, and it has those pre-canned for you. Thanks to Niraj. I want to point that out. Niraj's work with Markdown was phenomenal. Love it. One of the ones that I'm working on personally is the Practical Network Penetration Tester exam and converting Heath Adams' document file into Markdown so it will be baked in from scratch. That one's got a little bit of rough edges right now. But for right now, we're going to take the OSCP. What is my OS ID? It is going to be 12345. Apologies if that is a legit OS ID number for somebody out in the wild. And there you go. I mean, we can now change directory into that location and wait for the countdown and the email to come into our inbox. We can kick off that VPN access and get started on the lab. And my workflow for documentation on an exam is really no different than training. I'm going to edit my targets file to include the 4 IP addresses that aren't the buffer overflow box. Pop those in there. I'm going to run auto recon on those. And while those are going, you got it. You guessed it right. I mean, the same workflow that we do with everything else. I'm going to get started on the buffer overflow box. I've got a scratch pad here for ideas that come to my mind while I'm doing it. And the SITREP. SITREP is still growing and running with us. And just like with the Pen 200 course, whenever we're complete with all of these items, we just run AutoRpt finalize. And I'm not trying to drag out the meeting here. I'm really not. I'm just cutting through it as fast as I can to show you from a workflow perspective, from pre-engagement, during the engagement, and after the engagement, everything is seamless with AutoRpt, hopefully. I mean, so we've got, once again, I'm gonna go back over here to AutoRpt, exams directory, offensive security, OSCP, and let me pause here for just a second. You'll notice that each of these directories contains the engagement that you're going after, as well as a date stamp. That means I failed the exam in May. If I take the OSCP again in 3 months, I'm going to get a new working directory. So I'm not going to gunk up my previous attempt. That now gets to stay pristine as an archive that I can reference later on. And this new one is something that I can push through with success because I'm going to pass it this next time. And here's our report directory. It's created the 7-zip archive file for us. If we wanted to, we could include or add the file from our Pen 200 PDF to this, so we can submit both the Pen 200 lab report as well as the exam report for the OSCP. And here's our OSCP exam report. You'll notice that it does include our student ID, which is required. And we have everything we need to showcase what we've done on the systems. Complete, done. Obviously, we would need to write the actual report for each of these boxes as we own them. So that is the exam. Let's take a look at doing a CTF. What if, and we're kind of hoping we can do this, we're going to do a CTF. The CTF event name is BSidesGVL 21. And the team name, the team that I'm on is DEF CON 864. And we publish a bunch of our stuff into Markdown for some of the things that we do. Like if you want to write it to a blog report or something like that afterwards, because we're all concerned about that write-up afterwards, because the lessons learned. You'll notice I now have a whole new area here called CTF for the engagement of BSidesGVL 21 and my team name. So if this was on a network share, as we engage in what we find in the network, let's say we find a new, hang on, let me get to that directory so I can show that to you. So right now in this directory, there's only one file for the actual work, the actual engagement. And for the most part, anything that is a template related to training or CTF right now includes a section at the top for lessons learned. This was put in there to help you with the after action review, where not only do you complete the learning and the training, but it includes those wonderful areas where you look at it, not navel gazing, but you think through, what did I do great? What did I struggle with? That's now included in your report by default. If anything, the training and the CTF templates make it a one-stop shop. You do the work, and then I wanted to make it easy to be able to share that with the rest of the world. Post it on Medium, post it on your blog, whatever you wanted to do. Use it as a script for a YouTube video. There it is. But let's say in the CTF, we discovered that there is a new machine, something that, you know, one of our teammates says, hey, there's a new machine on the wire. I can just run AutoRpt add and says, do you know the target IP address? I'm just going to say, yes, I do. Here it is. And it creates a new file for us, and it updates the target.md file. So if I cat it's now added that IP address into the mix, and I now have a new markdown file specific to that IP address ready to go. So if we're on a network share, the team's working together, we're working and adding those files on the fly, and AutoRpt is just automatically adding and picking those up in the workflow. No problem. I do want, by the way, those of you in DEF CON 864, when we do get back into our CTF lab again, I really want to test this with a full-blown, all of us hammering away on it. I want to see if we can break that. So there we go. Throwing that out there. Nothing like senior code, struggle and die. AutoRpt, CTF is done. We won. So let's go ahead and can that report, wrap it up for us. We've got the final report is in Markdown. And you can see that it changed it from the Obsidian Markdown that we were working with before, and it's changed it into the common Markdown file format that I can just click the button at the top here and actually see what it looks like in the finished product. The last two we have from example perspective are bug bounties. Number 3 for a bug bounty, we're going to do bug crowd. And the program that we're going after in bug crowd is called DEF CON 864. And this time we're going to do it in the GitHub formatted markdown language, which was number 6. Again, exact same workflow. I can CD into that directory. And the cool thing is I can be anywhere on this file system. I mean, I'm not in that working directory right now, but if I run what I want to do next, it knows where that sitrep file is located for the active engagement, and it writes it there. So I can come back up to my bug bounty for this engagement, and I can say, where did I leave off? Oh yeah, I kicked off auto recon. When I run the ports command, it logs that it ran the port. If I log a vulnerability, it logs the vulnerability here in the system. In fact, if I go back into Metasploitable 2 for just a brief second, because I forgot to mention this, and look at the sitrep, you'll notice that it creates a backup of the vulnerability I logged. I'm really bad about fat fingering something and screwing up a file. But here in this case, if I needed to, I could rebuild that file. And then a pen test is the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. 964, my client name is going to be BSidesGVL. I don't have authorization to do this, so technically I probably shouldn't be doing any of that. And they have a Jira instance that they want to log all of their findings to. So I'm just going to pick Jira as the output. And there you go. No surprises, exact same workflow. Everything looks the same. I'm now no longer worried about my workflow in that regard. There is something that I want to point out that you may have noticed as I was working through this, and that's the all TTPs folder that gets created. To have that in your same workflow area, that's if you wanted to create like your punch list for how you pop Active Directory. What are your common SQL injection workflow that you do? That's where you collect all of those notes. And that's the bulk of it. I do have one super secret thing that I want to show you guys that's just recently been released. But first, I want to open it up for questions before I fly through any further. Are there any questions?
How long have you been working on this?
Since about May, and it started out super simple, but it's definitely gone way off track. All right. So the super secret thing that's just been released, there may come a point when you've done a ton of engagements and at the end of the year, you want to look back and say, you know, man, I've done a lot of things this year, but it'd be really nice to know kind of maybe some stats and statistics on that. So you might sit there in a very dramatic fashion, say, what have I done? Well, you just ask AutoRpt that and see what it comes back with. And it tells me that I've started a few things and never finished them. I've started some other stuff and actually finished them. And if I had started an engagement and run ports or vulns or something like that, it would show it as being in progress. And this is a great way for me to look back and just take stock and inventory about where my strengths and weaknesses are at a macro level. So it was a really quick introduction, but my hope is that this is a tool that all of you can use, and I hope everybody grabs it and kicks the tires on it. If you have any problems or run into any issues with it, open an issue on the GitHub page and I'll address it as quickly as I can with all that spare time that I have. And but yeah, it's for you. It's released GPL 3, so it's open source. Enjoy.